Cadence Keys writes steamy contemporary sports romance stories about complex alpha males and the women who love them. She loves football, coffee, and watching Gilmore Girl marathons. She has been writing for almost a decade now, so has lots to share with us, but only recently did she get the gumption to really do something with her work. She looks forward to publishing many more novels, especially her LA Wolves series. Let's find out what Cadence can teach us about getting started in our writing lives. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where we teach beginner writers how to find the time and the confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, then this is the place to be. Think of this as your weekly dose of encouragement, of hand-holding and general cheerleading as you figure out how you're going to write your first novel. Trust me, as a mum of 3 young kids, I know how tricky it can be to tuck some time aside for yourself on a regular basis. And even when you do find that spare 5 minutes, you can feel so overwhelmed that no writing gets done. Trust me, I have been there, but this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because once a week I'll be delivering an episode that gives you steps to building a writing routine, encouragement to build your confidence, and cheerleading until you reach the end. Okay, let's start. Well, thank you, Cadence, for joining me today. I'm really thrilled to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wonder if we could just start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to writing, how you started writing.
I've always loved writing. I was the only child for a really long time, and so my imagination would run rampant, and I loved reading. I was one of the last kids in my class to actually learn how to read, but once I started, I never put a book down. I would carry books with me in my purses whenever I'd go somewhere. Like, I always had a book. So the invention of a Kindle was really exciting for me. But yeah, so I've always been an avid reader, but I would write kind of on the side, but never really got the confidence to pursue it, mainly because I just thought it was something you had to do. You had to be through a big 5 publisher and you had to go through all of that. There was no way. And then with the rise in self-publishing and it becoming more acceptable to be a self-published author, I finally decided to push forward and try my hand at that. So
fantastic. Well, it's very similar to mine, actually. I was quite slow to start reading, but once I did, that was it. I couldn't believe this whole other universe opened up in my life. I think, well, probably the same, just it was never the same again.
Yeah.
So now you write romance, and you've said you write steamy romance. So without having to give myself the E rating on iPods, what's the sort of main difference between a standard kind of Mills and Boon's romance and steamy romance?
I don't know, Milton. Would you say Milton Boone?
Okay. Sort of like Harlequin, sort of
okay.
Very big in the 80s.
Yeah, so I've not read a lot of Harlequin. I know that's probably like big romance no, but I don't know. I feel like this is kind of a questionable thing because there's so many different levels of steam these days. Like, I hear some authors are like, oh, I've got a mid-level steam, and I was like, what is a mid-level steam? And so I guess they say it depends on the number of scenes where you get there's more visuals of what's happening in the intimate moments. And so, so for me, I see it as steamy because I have a couple of those, like just a handful. But for me, that would be enough that if I were expecting a clean romance, I would probably be really jarred to open my book and read it. Or even if I was expecting low steam or low intimacy or more closed door where it's implied but nothing's actually stated, versus mine is actually stated. So yeah.
Okay. I see.
But it's not, yeah.
Yeah. So you're writing the LA Wolves series. So tell us a little bit about that series.
So this LA Wolf series started off with Jack, which is the lead in, it's a football series, American football, I should say. It's an American football series that started with Jack. He's one of the main characters. He's a male lead in book one. And it just kind of came to me. And as I was writing that first story, I was like, oh, what about if this player had a story? And there's some chemistry between Paige, who's my female lead in that book, her best friend, and one of the other players on the team. And I was like, well, what if they got a story? And then it just spiraled from there. And I now have 5 books that I'm planning to release next year, from here on out. There will be 5 releases between December of this year and December of next year in that series that are all interconnected standalones.
I was just going to ask, okay, if it was a serial or... So you have, you've published the novella, the prequel novella, and then the others are coming in 3-month intervals. So I only write standalones. I don't write series at all. So to my mind, I'm thinking, oh, wow, that's super intensive. How have you gone about writing the series? Are you doing them all in advance, or are you writing them kind of one after the other?
So I guess a little bit of both. I don't like to write 2 stories at once, but I will work on editing a story and writing a story. So, for example, I have like 3 projects right now. So book 1, the novella is also I give out for free to people who sign up for my newsletter. And that's just kind of their Jack and Paige. It's a second chance romance. So their story is just a preview to their story. So that book, In the Grass, is the first one, and that comes out in December. That one's basically done. I'm just waiting for December to get here. Book 2 is Across the Middle, and that book is in editing stages. I wrote it in September in 3 weeks doing sprinting, which I'm now a huge advocate for sprinting. I think it's the best thing in the world. And I can definitely talk about that if you want me to.
Yeah.
So I wrote that in 3.5 weeks doing sprinting. And then I'm currently working on editing that one. And I'm prepping for book 3, which I will be doing. That's my NaNoWriMo project. So I'm doing NaNoWriMo, and I plan to get the first draft of that done during November.
Cool. Oh, I'm going to do Nano as well. So I'll be thinking about you. So you're prepping for that at the moment. What does prep for NaNoWriMo mean for you?
So I'm kind of old school. I love note cards. I know lots of people are like, oh, I want to buy Plotter and do all these things or all these different programs. And I just can't do it. One, because I stare at a screen enough during the day that it's just too much. And I jot notes down throughout the day or put them on my phone throughout the day of ideas. And so I usually get to note cards. So So I've got note cards for, I basically break it down by chapter. Like if I see specific scenes, I put that scene on a note card and that ends up being a chapter. And I kind of have like chapter goals for a novel. But I also leave myself some room to add things. Cause like, for example, my last book or book 2 that I just finished the first draft of, that one, I had all my note cards, my outline, several scenes, like really ready to go. And then as I was writing it, I realized there was a whole chunk that I was like, no, this happens too soon. And so I ended up adding like 5 chapters in between to really lengthen it out and add more depth, I thought, to their characters and their building relationship. And so that's what I like about note cards, is then I can lay it back out and say, okay, where does this fit? Or how can I adjust things without throwing off how I'd really visualize the story? And I also find that it makes going back and editing a lot easier, because I already see how everything plays out. And so I can just go back and figure out, okay, where does this fit appropriately, that it won't totally throw things off and it will enhance the story instead of just being like, wow, this came out of left field. Yeah. So I'm old school, and that works for me. And then I do some other things. I've been learning some other techniques to dive a little bit deeper into my characters. I'm currently taking Mary Buckham's plotting course, Break into Fiction. And that's been super wonderful just to help me really dive deep into who my characters are. and make sure that my conflicts aren't meaningless, that they have point and purpose. I'm not just throwing a bus in front of them to throw a bus in front of them, but that there's a point and they're given a choice, and we see the pull between what choice do I make? Why is this even a struggle for me? And so I feel like my characters for my next book are going to be even deeper because of all that work that we've been doing. So
that's Mary Buckham.
Mary Buckham.
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 I'll put a note of that in the show notes. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I found out about it through Alessandra Torre's Inkers group. Somebody had dropped it in, and it was about a plotting thing. It was a free webinar, and I like to plot, but I don't like to strict plot. But I do like to plot. And I was like, ooh, maybe this will help me plot a little bit better, because you never know you don't know what you don't know until you find out what you don't know. So, so then I signed up for this full course because I did learn some things that I was like, ooh, I didn't know that. So I signed up for the full course, and I'm living it so far. I find it really helpful, and it's made me look at my characters in a way I never had before.
Oh, fantastic! Well, I'm going to have to check that out for myself. Yeah. Character development is I'm realizing more and more just how important that is. It's not just about the storyline, but about the character that equal stay as well. Yeah,
especially in romance, because romance is so character driven, that we have to have those strong characters. So
Now, you mentioned sprinting, and that you've fallen in love with sprinting. So tell us about your method.
So I love sprinting. So I have a baby at home, and I have a full-time job. So my time is super limited and not my own. And I love sprinting because I can definitely find, I had watched a webinar about it where the people recommended either doing like 25 on and 5 minutes off, and then 25 on and 5 minutes off, or you'd sprint for an hour. And I was like, 25 minutes doesn't feel long enough to me, because I feel like it just doesn't feel quite long enough. And then an hour feels too long. I was like, I don't know that I can find an hour at a time. So I started sprinting, doing 30-minute intervals, because I was like, I know I can dedicate 30 minutes. And what really struck me about their advice about sprinting was that you have to shut off your editor, your internal editor, which is something that I didn't realize how badly my internal editor was getting in my own way. And so it really does help you shut it off, because you just have to write. You just have to go. You just have to get the words on the page, and you can go back and fix it later, but you can't fix what's not written. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was really powerful advice. And so I do 30-minute intervals, and I have found I'm a pretty fast typer. So depending on what scene I'm working on, or usually depending on what scene I'm working on, depends on the word count, but I can usually get anywhere from 1,100 to 1,600 words in a 30-minute sprint.
That's great.
And so there have been a couple times, like if I've been having a really off day, or just like my writing mojo was totally gone, I maybe got like 800. But I can usually get a pretty decent chunk out. So if my goal for the day is like 3,000, I can bump that out in usually like 2 or 3 sprints. Which cool. Also helps. Yeah, it also helps me feel, 1, more productive, and 2, more efficient, because if I have this big lofty goal, like 3,000 words, that's a lot. That's a lot of words in a day. But knowing I'm like, but I know that this is my average word count when I do a half-hour sprint. So really, when I break that down, at most, that's like 3 sprints. That's an hour and a half out of my day. And then it makes it feel so much more manageable, instead of like staring at a computer like, oh my God, I have 3,000 words I have to write, which feels like it's the hardest thing in the universe. And so it's helped mentally me be able to get those words on the page, 1, because it shuts off my internal editor, and 2, because it gets me out of my own head of like, oh my God, this is so many words. And so I love it. I rave about it to everybody that I can. I'm like, have you tried sprinting? Sprinting's amazing. When I first started using it, I didn't have a whole lot of writing buddies yet, because I was just getting really active into the writing world and writing community. And so I would hold myself accountable by putting on Twitter, like, hey, I'm starting a 30-minute sprint, catch you later. And people would actually comment, like, because I would do like hashtag sprinting or hashtag I'm writing romance or whatever. And people would actually comment like, hey, good luck, or, you know, what's your word count? And then I'd post it later. Again, it just helped me feel accountable of like, yep, there's somebody there that is going to notice, oh, hey, she hit her word count, or hey, she did finish her sprint. So that was one way for me to hold myself accountable. And now I have writing buddies that we all talk about sprinting together, and we all have equally crazy busy lives. So that's fun. Yeah.
I love that. It's certainly something I do encourage all of my students to do, is get an idea of roughly how much you can write in any given time frame, and then you can, as you say, kind of schedule that through your day or through your week. For me, scheduling, particularly in the early stages when you're transitioning from somebody who writes just for fun to somebody who's wanting to be more intentional with their writing, I really, really encourage my students to schedule in their writing time as well over the forthcoming week. Do you plan ahead with your writing over the week, or do you write every day, for example, or do you know that you've got, say, 2 days available to you when you can do your writing sprints? How do you try and formulate that over your week?
So I try to write at least a little bit every day when I'm writing something new. Once I am hit like the editing stages, that kind of adjusts a little bit. But when I'm in the middle of writing something new, I try to write a little bit every day, even if it's just 500 words. And so I find that I write the best in the morning. I'm just usually way too tired at night. And I fall asleep when my kid falls asleep. And so I try to get up a little early if I can and do like 30 minutes before I have to go to work. And then, on my lunch break, I'll try to do 30 minutes there. Sometimes I've used text to voice or voice to text to just, because sometimes you can't type, or I hate typing long stuff on my phone. It just feels like a lot of work to me. I prefer typing on a keypad because I'm faster. And so I'll just talk into my phone and get it all out that way. So those are ways, because those words still count. You may not be typing them, but they still count. And then the other thing is, I think the biggest thing for me is not comparing myself to other writers, because it's really easy in this community. There are so many writers doing amazing things for us to compare, like, oh no, I'm not writing as much, or I'm not doing as much, or I'm not releasing as many books. And that pressure can really get in your way. And so just knowing like whatever's good for you is good for you. Like you'll work your way up. It took me 4 years to write my first book. So the fact that I'm even taking the time every day to write my second and now my third, like that to me is progress. And so I just keep that in mind on days when I can't write as much. And then on weekends, I usually try to write more because I can write more while my son is napping, or I just have more time during the day because I don't have my job.
So. Yeah, because you're so organized. I'm so impressed by your energy, because your baby's only 6 months.
Yeah, well, I have a hand planner that I use for like all my writing, like to structure all my, like if I have writing stuff or takeovers or like webinars that I want to watch. And then like my phone, I have my calendar up on my phone that has everything else on there. I mean, yeah, it takes a lot of work to be that organized. And I'm definitely like losing a lot of things, I'm sure. But I've found I love writing, and it feeds my soul in a way that nothing really ever has before. And having my son just really kind of inspired me to pursue it, because I want him to be able to pursue his dreams and what really makes him thrive. And so just finding even just that half an hour a day to me is my self-care. Mm-hmm. Like that's how I take care of myself. And that's how I say, okay, this is mommy's time and I'm just going to write. And then I feel good. And it's my creative outlet. And, I've made lots of friends now in this community, and they're my people, and like we get each other. And so it's just like, it feeds my soul. And so I find that I have to make time for it, or else I just start to get stressed out and kind of grumpy.
Yeah, it's true. I'm a big believer that a happy mummy equals a happy baby. Very much so.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned community there before. So you've said that when you first started, you put on Twitter to just give yourself that feeling of accountability. But now you have either accountability buddies or just kind of writing friends. Did you find them through Twitter or?
No, so I'm actually like not even super active on Twitter. I really only use Twitter for when I need that like extra accountability or something. I found them all through Facebook, which I've never been a super huge fan of Facebook, but I've really loved the writing world, at least the ones I've stumbled on. I've heard there's some that are hit or miss, but the writing world I've found I really love, and they're all on Facebook. So the Inkers group, Alessandra Torre Inkers group, that was my first experience with a writing community. And I found so much information from there. In fact, Alessandra Torre's publishing course was the first thing I ever read, or not read on publishing, but it's what really helped guide my publishing journey and the structure that I took, at least getting started. And so that was my first group. And then I'm a wide author. I publish wide. I'm not exclusive to Amazon. And so I joined the Wide for the Win group on Facebook, which is awesome. I love that group. They're so sassy. I love it. So I love going on there and seeing what people are talking about and different strategies that people use. And then I've got another group, just like kind of a beginning writing romance group. We're all kind of freshly getting started, but all in different stages. Some of us have published multiples. Some of us haven't published at all. And so it's just a very diverse group, but we're all supportive and we're all like, okay, so what are you doing to do this? And how do you feel about these? And, so it's been fun to get to know each other. And now we started Zooming. So we have Zoom meetings where we actually get to like see each other and just chat about life or books or whatever. And so it's really been awesome. And that all just happened organically. Like I joined one group, and the thing is you have to participate in the community. That's what I found. You have to be an active participant, not just a fly on the wall. And that's really for your benefit, because I get so much more out of building those relationships than if I just sit back and passively scroll through the comments. And like, even though I get a lot of information out of like the Wide for the Win group, I'm not as active on there because I'm not fully published yet. Like my first book is still kind of getting ready to go. So I know that I'll be more active once I actually feel like I have something valuable to say. But in my other groups, I try to, be as active as I can when I have the time, because obviously social media is its own beast of time management. But yeah, just being really active in that community, and not just for what you can get out of it, but for what you can give back. Mm-hmm. Like if you can say, hey, if you see someone's freaking out, hey, you're not alone. Like this is really overwhelming and stressful. Just keep your head up. Like you've got this. Mm-hmm. Like even just something like that, you don't have to have any publishing experience to be a shoulder for somebody or just like a cheerleader for somebody. And that can be really powerful because it makes someone feel heard and seen. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's just the biggest piece, is being active.
Yeah, no, I that's a lovely. Are you just kind of a member of a few groups? Because I've discovered, because Facebook groups are so big now, I've discovered I feel like I'm a member of hundreds of them, and it's difficult to actually participate in so many groups. Have you been quite selective about the ones that you're a member of, or the ones that you participate in?
Yeah, so I'm a member of a lot because I do takeovers. And so I will participate still, like in some of those groups. If I see stuff, like I'll drop comments in or as needed. Or I still thought like I'm in some author groups because I'm myself a fan of those authors. And so I'll totally comment. Like just the other day, Take a Number by Amy Dawes came out, and she loves Gilmore Girls. I love Gilmore Girls. That's my life. And so, I definitely commented on how much I loved the opening Gilmore Girls argument scene. And I do that kind of stuff all the time. Well, when I can, because it's still a lot to comment on. Like there's so much that goes on and there's hundreds of comments, but even just dropping in there. And then there are, I would say, 3 writing groups that I'm a part of that I'm active in participating in. And those ones I definitely prioritize just because I feel like I've gotten so much from that community that I want to nurture that relationship and give back.
Good advice there. I think I need to take your advice on that one.
Yeah.
So I think my other question was going to be kind of around how you balance your writing time with working full time and having family. I think you've kind of answered that. And I'm guessing that your partner is supportive of your writing and kind of facilitates that as well, because it's not although what's going on in our brains is a solo activity, the writing life is not a solo job. We kind of need other people around to support us. So do you get that from your partner?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My husband is probably my biggest cheerleader. He's actually the one who pushed me to publish in the first place. He's like, you need to get this story out there. Like, you need to write like this is good for you and you love doing this. And so he is constantly cheering me on and helping out when he can. And because he works too. And so he's been a huge support. In fact, watching our son even now before my mom comes over for a daycare. He is, he's just awesome and been very supportive. And I frankly couldn't have done what I've done without his support.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking of family, I know that you use a pen name. I'm not going to ask for your real name, but I do like your name, and it does, Cadence Keys, it does fit, I feel, very well with your genre. How did you sort of come up with the name, and why did you feel the need for a pen name?
I've always loved alliteration. And so I just love the flow of Cadence Keys. And I see a lot of like generic last names when people go pen names, but I didn't want to be so generic like Stone, because I feel like I've seen a ton of authors with the last name Stone or something like that. And so I looked up different author names. I even went on like the Romance Writers of America membership list and was like, how many, okay. And I thought of different names, different like last names that I liked and different first names that I liked. Although I had always been leaning towards Cadence because I just love the meaning of the word. It's got that rhythm and flow, and I was like, how appropriate for a writer. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful name. And so I was like, okay, well, looking at that Cadence Keys, like, oh, that's a cool name. So I looked it up, and there were hardly any. Like, I didn't see hardly any keys. So I was like, okay, so no one would confuse me with someone else. And that to me was kind of important. And so that was the thinking behind that.
It's nice. It's nice. And why did you feel the need for a pen name rather than your own?
So nobody in my life outside of my family and a very, very select few friends know that I even write novels, let alone steamy romance novels. And so I didn't want people at my job knowing, because I just really wanted to keep that life separate. And it's not like I'm not ashamed of my writing. Like, I am very proud. I think it's a huge accomplishment. And so I'm very proud of the work that I've put out, that I'm about to put out. But it was just, I don't feel, there's a lot of judgment around romance. Like, if people aren't in that world. And for my professional career, like, I need my job. And so I just felt keeping it separate was for the best. In the long term. And I'd love to go full time as a writer down the line. And so, keeping a pen name would be fine for that. So that was the main reason, was just, I didn't want people in my real life to know until I was ready to let that one out. So when I go full time, then I'll be like, hello world, surprise.
Fair enough. I think those are fair enough reasons. Now, I've been on and I've had a look at your website, and it's a really good site. It's quite a simple one, but it does everything that you need, and it's got really nice graphics and movement on the page and stuff. So I wondered, it made me think, I wonder what you're doing in terms of kind of marketing and advertising and that kind of thing, because I think, especially for indie authors, but maybe traditional authors as well,
the biggest job in our life we think is going to be to just write this book, and then we write the book and we publish it and we realize, oh my goodness, actually the work has just begun. So I wondered what your thoughts were on marketing, whether you've put anything into place or whether you're going to wait till you've released everything and then sort of do a big push. What's your strategy at the moment?
So it's a little bit of a hybrid of that. So my current strategy is I'm not paying for ads. I'm not even paying for paid newsletters just yet. That is my plan here probably in the next book or two. I currently try to push everything to my website because I'm a wide author, so I'm not on just one platform. So I try to keep my website really up to date with everything. And then I do a newsletter that goes out once a month, and I'm using Story Origin, which is in its beta stages. So right now it's free. So if you're a brand new writer or just starting out, that would be a great resource to start building up your newsletter. And they've got all kinds of tips for how to do that. And so that's where I started. And I used my novella, Intentional Grounding, which is the prequel to book one, as my reader magnet. So whoever signs up for my newsletter, they get that for free. And so I've done that as a little bit of a marketing strategy. I am really active on social media, primarily Facebook and Instagram. I post at least once a day, and I schedule those posts, usually about a week in advance, so that my week I can focus on writing. And then for the book release, because there's a lot behind a book release that we don't really think about when we're writing the book. So I really wanted to get my book out there in front of as many eyes as possible, but I just didn't have those kinds of relationships cultivated just yet. And it'll probably take me more time. And so I've hired a PR company to do my cover reveal, reach out to bloggers for the cover reveal, art, and then a blog tour the first week of release. And so they're handling all of that, which on the one hand took a load of stress off my shoulders because I could focus on, formatting and then editing book two. And at the same time, it's a little bit terrifying because I'm like, how many people have signed up? Is anybody going to read my book? But my cover reveal's in a week and a half. So then I'm sure I'll start seeing where we're at with that.
And how did you find the company? I wouldn't know where to start, to be honest.
Yeah. So the Inkers group, they've been great. And that's the thing is it's okay to lurk sometimes. I've definitely stumbled on a lot of really good information just by I'm curious about this. And so I found that group on the Inkers group, and quite a few people had worked with them and spoke highly of them, and they were within my budget. So that was the thing. I did have a very tight budget for this first book because I am treating my writing like a business, and getting a business started is expensive. And so, the priorities when you're starting out are get a professional cover, because that's the first thing your readers are going to see. Make sure it fits the genre you're writing in. I looked at a lot of different sports romance covers before deciding what to go with, and working with my designer, who was amazing. I absolutely adore her. And so, making sure it fits. And then editing, make sure you have good editing. I was fortunate enough to have some connections that I didn't even realize I had until I was freaking out. Oh my God, I cannot afford, this, because editing can be really expensive, especially the more word count you have. And I was just I cannot afford this. But then I realized I had some connections, and I utilized those instead to just save me a little bit of money. But that's where a lot of your expenses should go, is to those things first, and then all the ad stuff can come later. But I decided to take a chunk of that change and put it towards this as a way to promote, since it is my first book. I don't have a huge audience yet, but I want to get it out there. So
that sounds really sensible. I just particularly holding back on the ad spend. I did pay for ads for my first book, and it was a good experience to do. I kind of understand it a little bit more, and I did see some return on it. But I think, it's particularly if you're writing a series, it's best to wait till you've got them all out, and then you can really push the first book in series and then get the read through. So I think it's one of the things I enjoy actually about the indie world, but is that you're always learning. It's, it's easy to get overwhelmed by it all, but if you just take one little bit at a time and learn about that, and before you move on to the next, there's always something new and fun to learn, and you begin to get a feel for what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Now, just going to turn direction for a little minute and sort of talk about more of the craft side of writing. When it comes to romance, I know that there are it's kind of quite famous for the different tropes that it's got, the expectations within in the many subgenres of romance. Who have you kind of turned to help you with that side of things, or has that come quite organically because you read in that genre too?
I think it's come organically because I do read heavily in that genre, because that's primarily all I read these days is romance, and I just soak it up. But when I'm looking for inspiration, I definitely have a few authors that I'll go to for craft, and those are typically Laurelyn Page. She writes like beautiful, I mean, they're dark and twisty, but they're totally beautiful and so well crafted. Like the writing is just, I could get lost in her writing for days. And she's definitely like a one-click author for me, because I know I'll always get a good story and really developed characters. And so she's one of my go-tos. Megan Quinn, I also really like her. She does sports romance, so I really like reading her sports romance. And she, again, does a really great job of craft. The writing is just beautiful. The characters are developed. And then Amy Dawes is another one I really like. And she does a nice job of that as well, of all those things. And so whenever I'm getting kind of stuck or just need inspiration, usually I'll go to one of my go-to authors and just see how do they develop these stories, or I'll read some of my all-time favorites. I'll just reread a favorite book. So Set Me by Jennifer Crusie was the first romance I ever read. And so that book holds a very special place in my heart. I was like 13 and stumbled on it in the library. And I will go back. I reread that book probably like a million times because I love it. And it's, the older I get and the more I read it, and now that I'm looking at it as a writer, it's just still so beautiful. Like I could just read it endlessly. Samantha Young is another one, and she's actually a Scottish author. And I love her. Her books are long, but they're long because they're long with a purpose. So it doesn't feel endless, and really builds that backstory. And she like never fails to make me cry, which I guess is like the sign of a good author, because I'm always so invested. The last book of hers I read was Black Tangled Heart, and I was just literally like a ball of tears. I was like, dang you, Samantha Young. But
I like it
really
cry.
Yeah. Her On Dublin Street series is what got me started on her, and it's so well written. It's really great.
Well, I'll link to these in the show notes so others can go and discover them too.
Yeah.
So you've said that you're working on book 2 and 3 at the moment. So I can imagine that you're going to keep up with your schedule, and people can see your release schedule on your website. But I'm wondering if you have plans for once the series is finished. Do you know that you want to stay writing in romance, for example, perhaps move on to another team or another sport or something different altogether?
So I have several other ideas. So I do think that the next, so after these first 5 books, I'll probably take a little mini break from the sports. But my idea with the LA Wolves is that they could kind of be endless, because players could get traded in. I mean, there's so much that could happen with that, which is one of the things I love about it. But so in book 2, there's a rock star that gets introduced. And there's going to be a spin-off series with him. So he's a friend of the main male lead in book 2. And so he's going to have his own series, and it's going to be a 4-book series. So that one's going to be just a set number of books on each of the men in the band.
Okay.
And then I do have a couple other ideas. My husband is ex-military, and so I've talked to him about helping me write some military romance, which he always laughs at because he's like, okay. He doesn't understand our love for men in uniform, but I love a good man in uniform. So,
absolutely.
So there might be some of those. I've got some of those stories down, and then I have one story that's pretty close to my heart because it's a fairly personal story, and one I probably relate to the most, and would definitely be putting a lot of myself into that story. But I don't know that I'm ready to write it. But down the line, I would love to. I've got quite a few chunks of that already written, but it's just a very emotional story, and so it's one that I have to write it and release it when I'm ready, and it's hard to go back to right now. So.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who teaches people to write biography and memoir, and that was her recommendation, is when you're still so close to it and it's hard to write about it, not just passionately, but with a degree of objectiveness. And so you'll know, and your body kind of will tell you when you're ready to put this out and ready to write it. It's really interesting how our bodies can be a real kind of guide to us in our writing and this kind of what's going on in our head. Now, I was just interested in what you were saying there about a lot, because I've talked to a few romance writers now, and it's an interesting thing. I've noticed that romance readers really love not just the principal characters in book one, but they want to know about the best friends and then the friends of the best friends and so on and so forth. Sort of getting to know a whole school or a whole town. I think I quite like that aspect of the kind of romance world, that it makes it, I suppose it fits in with the sort of romance idea, but it's like this big cozy family and everybody gets to know, or a big family where there's lots of disputes and disharmony, but then everyone comes together again at the end and makes friends. And is that kind of stories that you enjoy as well?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do. And I didn't even think about doing the Rockstar series. Really came out of, I was writing book 2 and I was like, oh, how cool would it be, if they know each other, and then, and then he could have a spinoff, and then it was like, oh, and then it just like was down the rabbit hole. And now I'm like, outlining. But it is, I do love that because I do get very curious about those side characters. And so then I love it when they get their own book, which is probably why I was driven to write interconnected standalones, because all those characters are going to be introduced and we see them. And I love that you see them from someone else's lens, but then you get to see them from their own perspective. And it's like, wow, like there's so much more to a person, which I think is true in life. Like you can see someone, but you don't know their story. But I do think it's really funny because my best friend read my book and she was like, I want to know more about Max. And Max is the best friend and personal assistant to Jack, who's my lead character. And I had no intentions of ever writing a story about Max. And she was like, I need a story about Max. And so now like Max is going to get himself a novella down the line because I'm just like, all right, I'll write him a story, and there are little pieces that have come out kind of organically, now in book 3, there's some Max stuff happening, and I'm like, okay. So he's going to get a novella eventually, but because she keeps asking me about it.
I love it. You're never kind of out of ideas that way. It's great.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very conscious of time. I've taken up a lot of your time. So I wonder if you could just let listeners know where they could find you online.
Yeah, so the best place to find me would be my website, which is cadencekeysauthor.com. And from there, I've got links to my social media. I'm on Instagram, Cadence Keys Author, and Facebook, Cadence Keys. And I've got a reader group on Facebook as well, Cadence Keys Book Lovers. And so, feel free to find me on there and join my newsletter, because my cover reveal is next Thursday, but newsletter subscribers will get to see it on the 4th, because I just can't hold on to it anymore. And so, I'll send out lots of previews and things in my newsletter, but I don't spam people because I hate getting newsletters like every week. So, so those are the best ways to stay in touch.
Lovely. That's great. Well, Cadence Keys, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Before you go, I wanted to tell you about my Patreon page. Whenever anyone supports the show, it expresses just how much you're enjoying the content and how much you want it to continue. Your support helps maintain the podcast and keeps it going. It means I can create better resources for you when you're listening to the podcast or checking out the webpage. It means I can focus on getting a higher reach of audience. And when we get a higher reach of audience, we can get more guests. Guests that are really going to help you. And then who knows where it'll go from there. As a new podcaster and someone who's starting out and finding their feet in the podcasting world, just as I'm helping you find your feet in the writing world, I can't do it alone. I always need help, so I'd love it if you would support the show by signing up. There's just one tier, $3 a month, and for that I'll make sure that each week I'm delivering the best podcast I can for you. And as a way of saying thanks, I'll give you a personal shout out on the show. So check out the page at patreon.com/Emma Desi. That's patreon.com/Emma Desi. See you next time.